Volunteer engagement is a strategy that can build organizational capacity well beyond what staff alone can achieve. Most nonprofits today work from a model of traditional volunteer management as opposed to a collaborative model of volunteer engagement. Shifting from a volunteer management approach to a volunteer engagement approach includes adopting new practices, new concepts, new behaviors, even new language. Management connotes traditional ways of engaging volunteers that are hierarchical and prescribed by staff. In volunteer management, most of the time, staff tell volunteers what to do, when to do it, how to do it, and even where to do it. It's very position-centered, as opposed to volunteer engagement, which is much more collaborative. In a model of volunteer engagement, volunteers really are our partners in work, in the mission-related work of our organizations. They share their skills, they give their input and feedback, and they are in fact co-creators of our projects. In a culture of volunteer engagement, there are leadership career paths for volunteers, leadership career ladders for high performers and those who are interested in engaging further with our organizations. As organizations shift from a culture of volunteer management to a culture of volunteer engagement, we as leaders of organizations really need to shift our terminology, our language as well. So for example, instead of talking about recruitment of volunteers, we really focus, instead of recruiting outward externally to get certain numbers of volunteers to fill our open positions, we instead focus on cultivation of relationships over time with potential and existing volunteers. We cultivate outside of our organizations for new volunteers, and we cultivate our existing volunteers for more. In addition to shifting language from recruitment to cultivation, we also shift in our idea from traditional placement of volunteers, which is kind of that round peg, round hole mentality of trying to find the perfect volunteer to fit into our existing positions. Instead, we focus on negotiation, where we ask potential volunteers, what is the skill that you would gladly share with us if we could make it possible for you to do so? And there begins the negotiation of how we can leverage volunteer skills on behalf of our organization. We also shift our language, or in fact our roles, of how staff and volunteer leaders interact with volunteers. Rather than the traditional volunteer management model in which staff supervises volunteers, staff instead support volunteers. Really working on that collaboration and putting themselves in a role of ensuring that the volunteer has everything he or she needs in order to be successful. We also shift from a model, from that human resources model of volunteer management where staff actually performed performance reviews on volunteers, to one where we really focus on together measuring results, the impact of volunteer work. And finally, we shift from traditional volunteer recognition, we like to call them the triple P approach, pins, plaques, and parties, to one where the impact of volunteer work and volunteer collaboration is measured and jointly celebrated and acknowledged through personally meaningful ways, whether that means offering opportunities for professional development, opportunities to have lunch with the executive director, to present to the board or write an article on their work, or simply giving a gift card to a favorite coffee or tea shop. Personally meaningful acknowledgement is what volunteers today are seeking. So to sum up, one of the biggest shifts in language and in approaches is that we really shift from a traditional model of volunteer management where the focus is on retention of volunteers, certain numbers of volunteers for many, many years, to rather sustaining a culture of volunteer engagement where individuals know they have a long-term relationship with an organization and they can move in and out as volunteers and as contributors, in fact, as partners in mission fulfillment with us.